Thank you for having us here. Thank you, Daryl, for all your work on putting this together. One of the things I like about Sue is she makes it fun. Even talking about money, making it fun. If we can find ways to make it more playful, then people will be more willing to engage in it. One of the parts of my job is to normalize talking about money in our churches. We're afraid of it so often and we avoid it. So how do we normalize talking about money? I'm also here to facilitate. So I work in this field. I'm a generosity officer, but I also know you all have a lot of experience and wisdom in this. So please feel free to chime in. I start with this slide to do what Sue asked me to do, and that's to say a little bit about who I am. This is a picture from Douglas Congregational United Church of Christ in Douglas, Michigan, a church that I served for 9 years. We had usually about 50, 60 people in worship on a Sunday, 120 or so who made up that group. And if you would have asked me 10 years ago if I would be working in fundraising, I would have said no way. This is not something I wanted to do at all. Previously, I've also been a newspaper reporter, a community organizer around public transportation, and then also served as executive director at a ministry walking alongside people who are unsheltered and living in poverty. But when I was at Douglas, we were coming towards, I think it was like October or so, we were on a calendar year budget. Our budget was like $85,000. I was the only person who got paid besides the pianist. And we were coming to about October, and this never happens to you, I'm sure, but we were seeing that we were not going to meet our budget. And there was a man named Ron in the congregation who came up to me and said, Andy, that's not going to happen. We're going to meet our budget. And we were projecting being like $16,000, $18,000 behind, which out of $85,000 is a lot. He said, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to give $5,000 to go towards that. And then what you and I are going to do is we're going to go meet with people we know in our congregation have a capacity to make a larger gift. And so we're going to go have coffee and lunch, and we did that. We went and met with people who we knew were passionate about who we were and what we did, and we asked them to give to close this gap. And he said, we're also going to have a plan for next year, because we can't keep going back every year and saying, we have a deficit, will you please fill it? And so we came up with a plan for giving and stewardship in the coming year. Ron's constant mantra was, no money, no mission. No money, no mission. And people were passionate about our mission. Our motto was, everyone welcome, no exceptions. And this congregation truly lived that out for the past about 135 years now. And they were passionate about it. But if there's no money to carry it out, that's a problem. And so we also flip it around and say, if you know your mission, you'll know money. So we'll get more to that in a few minutes. So it worked. We raised, I think, about 12 to 13,000 of the gap doing that. And then we went to the congregation and said, hey, folks have stepped forward to help meet this gap. Would you do the rest? And they did. And so that was kind of my first major lesson in fundraising. You have to actually ask people for money is the key. And also be passionate about your mission. I also want to thank you all for your support of OCWM, our church's wider mission, which you give to the conference, and some of that stays for your great work here in the conference, and some of that comes on to the national setting and goes to do a whole variety of wonderful things, support disaster ministries around the country, our advocacy office in Washington, D.C. How many of you know we have an advocacy office in Washington, D.C.? We have 5 staff people working for justice in the halls of Congress there. It goes to support our website, ucc.org, which has seen a 50% increase in traffic over the last year. And the Find a Church portion of that website, it used to be that if you said find a church near me, ucc.org was on about page 15 on your Google search. Now we're in the top 3. It comes up. So, and that is a direct service, I hope, to you all, because I hope people are finding you through that. At National, the two things we see that we can do uniquely are, one, proclaim an identity of the United Church of Christ and a United Church of Christ brand that we can all be a part of and that will, again, help you as local churches. And then second, to build capacity in our local churches, in our conferences, in our associations, and other organizations. So those are our two priorities national. So I want to say a bit about the perspective that I come from. For me, when it comes to stewardship, remembering that, as Jesus said, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. When somebody's new in your congregation, maybe they've been there a week, maybe they've been there a month, maybe they've been there a month, and they make a gift for the first time. Decide, okay, I've been here, I've seen what they're doing, I like it. Somebody gets up and says, hey, would you give to the offering? The plates are passed. They put a check in the offering plate. I say a check because then you know who it is. If there's cash you don't know, what happens? When somebody makes a first time gift. It's deposited, all right. Yes, that's good news. Can you use it for mission? Yeah. Yeah, and this is a typical response, right? So somebody or some family has just decided to give you a piece of their heart. And we've basically ignored it. We've basically ignored it. To talk about a little bit about that competition that Sue mentioned earlier. What happens when you make a first-time gift to, you pick, the college you went to, you know, the local humane society, the homeless shelter? What happens? That's right. You get a letter a week for the rest of your life. Yeah. And if they're really good, they'll call you up. Well, that letter will be hand-signed and have a personal note on it. And if they're really good, they'll call you up and say, hey, thank you so much for that gift. Here's the difference it's making in the world. Could you tell me a little bit about why you gave to our organization? And you'll tell them about your dog that whatever, or your aunt, or your uncle, or your neighbor, or your fellow church member. And so you'll start to build a relationship. And also that organization will start to know, okay, we do 3 things, but they really like this one. And you may not notice it, but they'll send you letters about that when they're asking for money. So I think part of what excites me about this work is having worked in the church for 15 years as a pastor and then worked in nonprofit for 5 years as an executive director. How can we learn to bring some of those practices that nonprofits successfully use to raise money into the church? So how do we reach out and thank people for a first-time gift? In nonprofits, we know that a first-time gift is the hardest gift to get. It takes the absolute most work to get a first-time gift. The second hardest gift to get is the second one. After that, it's so much easier. It's so much easier. So pay attention to those first-time gifts because people are giving us their hearts. And then there's this quote from Henry Nouwen: as a form of ministry, fundraising is as spiritual as giving a sermon, entering a time of prayer, visiting the sick, or feeding the hungry. Jesus talked about money and possessions second only to the kingdom of God. We, in this room, most of the time think about and deal with money more than just about anything else. And so we ignore talking about that at our own peril in our parishes, in our congregations. As a pastor, I get to be at the most intimate places of people's lives, and you do too. Why not money? What's more intimate than money? And people are hungering for conversation and help around how do we deal with money. So that's a little bit about where I'm coming from. We're going to get some more practical pieces here. I hope that you'll find really helpful and applicable. Does anybody know what we're looking at here? Ah, you guys are too good, too good. Yes, different parts of a heart. So these are 7 proven ways to increase giving. As it says on the top of the handout, the outline of it comes from a study that Barbara Fullerton did. called Growing Generosity, Identity as Stewards in the Other UCC, the United Church of Canada. She studied over 3,000 churches to say, those churches that are doing really well around raising money, what are they doing? And how's it working well? And so that's the outline for this. But what she also found was you can do the first 5 things on this list. So on the handout, it's mission clarity, communicate a compelling case for giving, organize an annual campaign, provide multiple opportunities, and tell people you appreciate their giving. Those are kind of the operational things that you can do to make giving go better. But if you only do those, giving won't increase. You have to put the whole heart together around integrating stewardship in worship and around intentionally forming stewards and creating a culture of generosity. So first is mission clarity. Are we clear about what we're about? Can we say it in 6 words or less? Some of you might recognize this, hard to see up there, but it's the United Church of Broomfield. Rooted in love, rooted in faith, rooted in community. So again, when I'm looking at these things, these are more of our motto, right? Most of us have a longer mission statement. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this section because you all probably have, or there are other resources that you have that can help you with your mission statement. Here's Mountain View United Church, an ecumenical, inclusive, and welcoming community. Well, you know what? I bet if I put that alongside other churches in their area, that would tell me a lot about who they are and if that was a much better fit for me. Cathedral of Hope in Houston, hope, compassion, inclusion. I hope you recognize this one. This is the United Church of Christ mission, purpose, vision, and mission. United in Christ's love, a just world for all. United in spirit, inspired by God's grace, we welcome all, love all, and seek justice for all. You can put it on t-shirts. This is a great way to do evangelism. Put it on t-shirts. Spirit of Peace UCC in South Dakota, progressive, diverse, inclusive. This is one of my favorites. You may not be able to read it where you're at. It's Plymouth Church in Des Moines, and they've actually put it in their stained glass relatively recently. And I think it really could be our motto for the whole country. It says, we agree to differ, we resolve to love, we unite to serve. Like, yeah, can we figure that out, please? And one of the things about mission statements is then we filter everything we do through them, including the stories we tell and how we tell them. This is another one of my favorites from Manhattan, First Congregational in Manhattan, Kansas. Love unconditionally, challenge spiritually, minister fervently. This is West Hollywood United Church of Christ. No condemnation here. We are a loving community embracing Christ's spirit and justice. And I put the picture of their building up there. I should leave most of this for Susan, but I'll touch on it a little bit. This bright light up here is a billboard. Okay, they're in Hollywood, right? So they get to rent this billboard out for about $10,000 a month. They're also looking, and they're on a pretty main street there. Their sanctuary is on the main level. They're looking at making the main level retail, renting it out, and building up and back. So sanctuary would probably be towards the back, but also then building condos and apartments up. So how do we figure out creative ways to find revenue? As a church, can we ask for mission clarity? Why are we here? What unique God-given purpose do we serve? Where do we sense God calling us to go? And how and where? I came across this one somewhere. I loved it when thinking about mission. How and where will we confront death? We are a resurrection people. And once you figure that out, you can put it everywhere, including toilet paper rolls in your bathrooms. You can change the toilet paper and the world. I won't identify which church does this, but get your mission statement everywhere.
That was a church newsletter?
No, I took this picture in a bathroom in a church in Oregon. Yes. So the next section is communicating a compelling case for giving. Most of us pass out a church budget that looks something like this. And most eyes in the congregation look like this when we pass that out. There is, I think about 97% of people just glaze over when they see a budget like this, or better yet, they find a $100 item and pick it out and argue about it for the next half hour. You have to have one of these, right? We all have to have one of these. But you don't have to present it, you have to have it available, but you don't have to present it at your annual meeting. You can create a narrative budget. How many of you actually do a narrative budget? A few of you? Okay. Again, I'm not going to get into it much deeper right now. We can if we have time at the end. But something that uses both your mission and then photography and story to tell the story of what you're doing as a congregation. So you might take that budget and split it up into maybe the 5 areas that you do work. Worship, children, pastoral care, outreach. What am I missing? Something? Christian ed. So break it up and say, okay, we spend 30% on worship. We spend 20% on Christian ed. We spend 25% on outreach. We spend 10%, and break it down into those categories, and then say, okay, our pastor spends this much time in each of those, and a portion of their salary is that way. The amount the building is used for each of those things, and a portion the costs of the building that way. So then when I think about, okay, I'm giving to the church, I'm not thinking about I'm paying the pastor's salary and I'm keeping the lights on. I'm thinking about I'm changing the lives of people who come here every week for the AA meeting. I'm changing the lives of people who come to worship hurt and broken and find a community that makes them whole again. I'm giving to form our children in the love of God. I'm giving to change our community and make it a more just place. That's what a narrative budget can start to do for us, and it can be a storytelling piece. Speaking of vital storytelling, this is a picture and a slide from the website of Manhattan, Kansas, United Church of Christ. So this is actually a video. They have both a still life on there and then a raised quote. This is the first church I've ever been in where I could be completely myself and that was okay. And then they have a video, a short video of this woman telling her story. And they have 3 or 4 of those on there. You'll see in this section, I've encouraged you to look at your website and to look at it through the eyes of visitors. We tend to build our websites for our members. And I'd be curious how many of our members actually look at our website for anything, maybe the calendar. But when people are looking for a church, the first place they're going to visit your church is online. And it needs to be up to date. I don't know how many websites I go to where the last sermon on there was from 2015, where the pastor who's listed is no longer there. And it just has stuff on the front. I mean, it'll say who we are, but it really just says what we do and what our meetings are. I find it much more powerful to hear from a member of the congregation about what inspires them, what changes them, what makes a difference for them on that front page of the website as a way of inviting folks. This is a photo series from Rincon UCC down in Arizona. At Rincon, I found true conviction and love, not only for the community, but for faith and connection to the Word of God. The best part is I feel that same love and welcoming as the first time I came almost a year ago. I want to go to that church, right? I see and hear that. And there's a whole series of photographs that then they use online, but also in their social hall. So if I could wave a magic wand and have every congregation in the UCC do one thing for stewardship, just one, I would have somebody get up in your congregation every week and say, this is why I love this church. I mean, you can ask them to say, this is why I give to this church, but it's a lot easier to tell people or ask people to say, this is what I love about this church. And it goes back to what I was saying about the narrative budget. Because then I know that I'm going to support this widow who just lost her husband and who found such meaning in the way the pastor and the congregation surrounded her. I'm giving to support this family that is going through a crisis and we made a real difference. Also have community members come in. You know, we're giving to this organization that is providing a place for, as Jenny was saying, people on the margins, whatever that might be, and making that difference in our world. Now, some of you are real numbers people, And some of you have numbers people in your congregation who love to do this kind of thing. This is relatively recent. There's a study that came out called Sacred Spaces, and they studied urban congregations, but urban congregations of all sizes. In fact, some of them have closed since then. And they found the average economic impact of these congregations on their community was $1.7 million a year. And it's things like volunteer hours worked, $94,000 worth over 52 weeks. A reduced crime rate in our area. Crime within this particular tract where this church was compared with the surrounding tracts. Crime prevention and reentry of reentering citizens, 84,000. Getting people off drugs and alcohol, 78,000. This is an interesting one. Divorces prevented, $22,000, $900 per couple. You know, how do you come up with that? I'm not sure. And some would argue there are some divorces we don't want to prevent. Anyway, building enhancements and capital campaigns, $60,000. Estimates that half of those expenses were spent locally. You know, people came in to do work from the local community. Actually, they even have trees in here. $523 based on the USDA Forest Service values of trees. Helping people gain employment, $14,500 per arranged employment for $725,000. Suicide prevention, $58,000. A garden, lawn, or cemetery, $146 a year based on the water retained. This particular school or church had a K through 12 school. Their church budget was $500,000, and 80% of operating budget provides stimulus to the local economy. And then members' expenses in town. The number of town members per average visit and how much they spend when they come to church. So this is not only helpful in your church, but it's helpful when you go out into your community. It's one of the pieces that we're growing in as congregations, to go out into our community and say, what would this community look like if we didn't exist? And if the answer is it would look the same, then that helps us think about what our mission could be. But most of the time it's going to be, wow, we would miss this, this, and this. I mean, we're providing a value to the community that you can put a number on. And then when we need to go for a capital campaign, there are people in the community who we can make the case that you want to support this, whether you ever come to church or not, whether you believe in God or not. You want to see this kind of impact in your community, and you don't want to see it go away. I was telling Rob earlier about a congregation in Kalamazoo, Michigan, who did something similar to this. And they had local foundations support their capital campaign to the tune of $300,000, whose explicit mission statements of these foundations said, we do not give to religious organizations. But they saw the impact that this church was having in the community and said, we need to support you, don't tell anybody. So, you know, find those numbers people who like to do things like this and you know, play with it. Oops, wrong button. There we go. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead. This is somebody telling their story in your congregation. Vital storytelling. What I love about my church is I give to my church because we are living out accomplishing our mission by, and then the different many channels that you can use, the newsletter, the website. Thank yous. That comes later, but I'm a part of a church that when I get I think I get quarterly receipts from them, quarterly pledge updates from them. And how hard would it be to put a paragraph about what difference my money is making in the world? It says, here's your pledge, here's how much you've given, thank you very much. Like, just tell me a story. Write a paragraph about how this one way that this is making a difference in the world. You're sending it out anyway, you're spending the money. Do it in worship, do it on social media. I mean, that's huge. You know, invite people when they're there on Sunday morning to just check in your congregation. That's a great soft way of doing evangelism. And just get those stories out there into the community. And also be supporting the stories of other organizations that are aligned with yours. All right, the third part is organizing an annual giving campaign. Maybe your church sometimes gets to, like this one up here, we only give when we feel led. The last time we felt led was in 1979. Or maybe you have a pledge card like this. Pastor Joseph was very excited about the Stewardship Committee's new idea. Step 1 on the pledge card, how much do you make? Step 2, send it all in. Should help us raise next year's budget. There's a lot of conversation going on right now about whether you do an annual giving campaign or not. I also want you to note that I don't call it an annual stewardship campaign, because stewardship is something we need to be doing year-round. When we call it a stewardship campaign, people think we only do it in October or November, whenever it is that you spend 2 to 4 weeks focusing on stewardship. As I said earlier, Jesus talked about money and possessions more than anything than the kingdom of God. Shouldn't we do the same? We can be incorporating that into our weekly worship services and preaching. Here's the other piece around that stewardship campaign in the fall. I'm sure this doesn't happen at your churches, but at other churches, people just don't come, right? They stay home. Like, I don't need to go hear that again. Or I don't want to hear that because all they're doing is ever asking me for money. Or even if they come, they emotionally and intellectually just absent themselves. They just kind of sit there and do whatever people do in church when they're not listening to the sermon. So I think it's really important to have ways that we are intentionally asking people to consider what they're giving to the church, to other places that they're giving to. And asking them, if you are inspired by this mission and these stories, please consider giving to us. And if you want to do a pledge campaign, that's great. If your church is one that is so resistant to, the church I was at in Douglas had never done a pledge campaign, and we did it, and it mostly worked. You know, you still have a percentage of people that are never going to pledge, and you just plan on that. But it's a great way to get people to just sit down and think about how much do they value the church, not only for themselves, but for the whole community and the congregation, and to make a decision about how much they can give. Or if you want to learn from our Jewish sisters and brothers, many of them will sit down with their congregants and their 1040s and negotiate. What are you going to give? You know, let's talk openly about money here. So whether you have an annual giving campaign or not, to be regularly asking folks to consider their giving and to make gifts, to do so thoughtfully and prayerfully, think about their financial investment in the church. And then follow it up with phone calls and visits. This is last year's or the current year's UCC resources on giving campaign called What Shall We Bring? Have any of you used that? Some of you? Right. Hey, that's one anyway. It's we partner with the disciples to do this. It's great. It has posters, commitment cards, sample letters, all kinds of different things that you can use. It's downloadable for $35 online at UCC Resources. I know we used to have a print version, and that was much easier for those of us who don't live next to Kinko's. But that's where it is right now. Yeah. If you want to raise money, you got to talk to people. Number one way to raise money is to ask people directly. In person is best, but even to call. You know, when I was at Douglas, we would have to figure out where we could go where there were enough phones that we could make calls, right? But now everybody has one. And you can make it fun, like get together in a room and follow up all the people who didn't get their pledge forms in. And, you know, it's like pulling teeth to get your stewardship team or your council to do that to start with. But once they make a few calls and start talking to people, it's fun and exciting. They found out, I mean, usually people just forget. Right? I mean, I told someone in a group I'm a part of recently, yeah, I'll contribute $50 for that. I forgot. He emailed me saying, hey, I'm waiting on $50. Oh yeah, thank you. I'm happy to give that. I'm glad it went for this, you know? People just forget. Or their life circumstances change. And that's really important for you as church leaders and pastors to know. It's an opportunity for pastoral care. Multiple opportunities for giving. So whether you have an annual giving campaign or not, to be continually asking people in different ways that work for different people. You know, Ann and I were talking earlier about, we have some younger folks who aren't giving regularly every Sunday, but if there's a special need that comes up in some way, they're more than happy to give. So how do we work with that? You know, maybe you have people who would like to rent headsets when they come into church. $3 each. Channel 1 has the sermon. Channel 2 has only the hymns. Channel 3 has football. And Channel 4 has NASCAR. You know, might work. You can listen to the Broncos while you're sitting in church. This is a church, island church in California, and every week they have this sacred cow that they bring forward, and it's a way of people honoring and celebrating things that have happened in their lives, anniversaries, birthdays of themselves, or friends, or family members, or people have passed on. And when they come up to share that, they offer a financial gift with it. Anybody want to guess what the cow's name is? Holy? Moolah. Moolah. Carol, the pastor, didn't know that until I asked her to send me this picture. So there are all kinds of ways that we can invite people to give in different ways. Special offerings, immediate needs. You know, that's something we see that social media is playing a great role in these days. You know, you put out on Facebook that a family is going through something and needs money to help. It's amazing how fast that gets met. Capital campaigns, of course, giving for mission. I'm a part of a church that all loose change that is collected every week, undesignated gifts, are given out into their community through a granting process. So, you know, people are really inspired to give to that beyond their pledge giving. Giving boxes. So does anybody have like a way for people to give in your narthex or social hall? See, one or two heads nodding. We're really good in the UCC about letting people use our buildings and bringing community groups in to use our buildings. But we rarely ask the people who are coming in to make a gift to support that. I mean, maybe the group is paying rent, but also maybe somebody's been coming there for 15 years as a part of their Narcotics Anonymous group, and their life has been changed in this place, and they just got an inheritance. Yeah, I'd like to give $5,000 to help here. But we're never even asking, much less making a way for it to happen. I'd also encourage you, if you have groups meeting in your facilities, to try to get to them I would say once a month, but even if you could get to them 3 or 4 times a year, just to go say, hey, thank you. We're so glad you're here. Here's who we are. I mean, I was talking to a pastor they have a farmer's market in their parking lot. And he would go out there, especially when he was first there, and say, hey, do you know where First Congregational is? They're like, no, where's that? Right there. Like, we do this because it's a part of our values. When it comes to fundraisers, I just advise you to be careful. Know the point of doing them. So if it's about fun, that's one thing. If it's about building community, that's one thing. If it's about service, that's one thing. If it's about raising money, that's another thing. You can try and do all of them together, but my experience of fundraisers is that oftentimes you're going to put more time, energy, and cost into it than you're ever going to get out of it. Especially this day and age, as hard as it is to find bodies for people to do things. There are some that are very successful, especially long-standing ones, and some new ones can be. Just be careful and connect it to your mission. Oh, I keep pushing the wrong button. You're going to hear more about this later. We need to be doing planned giving. It's another form. And then, you know, which seating section would you prefer for our offering? Cash, online, credit cards, checks. I'm out of change. Could we ever figure out how to make giving easy? Like, we're really good in churches at making giving hard. We want to make it as difficult as possible for you to give to us. One of my favorite things when I go to a church on Sunday, I'm going to be up at Community UCC in Boulder tomorrow, is I never carry a check. Absolutely never carry a check. I rarely carry cash. So when you ask me to give during the offering, can I give? And in most places, I can't. One of the first places I was able to, I was here in Colorado Springs a 1.5 years ago, and they had text to give right in their bulletin, and they invited people to do that. That's one way to think about it. I don't remember what all my slides are. The giving box I talked about, online, text to give, and more now for younger people is just using your phone. whether that's Venmo or Apple Pay or other things that you can just give straight person to person, person to organization. And how do we figure out how to do that? Believe it or not, there are, like after church, I can go anywhere and pay for lunch with my credit card, right? So why can't I make my gift by credit card? There are actually offering plates that have the tap version of credit card giving. So you want to stimulate conversation and change culture in your congregation? Propose that. And again, why do we think that church needs to be so much different than every place else when it comes to money? Pastors should be writing 5 to 10 thank you notes a week, both about giving and about volunteering. When I was a nonprofit director, I wrote thank yous on every letter that went out thanking people for their gifts. But every November, I would sit down and write 200, 250 thank you notes that had just thank you for supporting this. And the amount of feedback that I got, positive feedback on that, like I've never gotten a note like that before from your organization or from any other organization. If you start writing those notes to your folks in the congregation, you'll be amazed at the response that you get. Now, integrating stewardship with worship. So are we using bulletins and shirts? Are we preaching? You know, when it comes up in anything about money comes up in the lectionary, if you're preaching lectionary, are we actually addressing it and talking about it? Do we include our youth? Whether it's collecting the offering. I know some churches do like a noisy offering, have youth go around with coffee cans and throw things in. And then letting the youth decide where that money goes. You know, have them, and our children will lead us. Children are very, very generous in general. A minute for mission. The offering celebrated as a high point. Communicate this to our musicians, please. Make it a celebration. The last 2 places that I've been to preach on generosity, I've invited them when the time for the offering came. I've said, there are other cultures who dance the offering up. You know, we're like, no, we want to like hide and not let anybody see us as the offering plate comes by. There are other cultures that dance the offering up. Let's try that. And people have done it, and it's been amazing and fun to watch. How do we celebrate that we have gifts to bring, financial gifts and other gifts? Whenever I invite the offering, and that's, Barbara Fullerton found that's key, that you need to invite the offering. Don't just sit down after the sermon and have the ushers get up. This is a great time to say to people, here is what you are giving to support in this community and in this congregation. Please give generously. And then, yeah, invite them to dance it up and to celebrate that. And then, what I was going to say is invite people to touch the offering plate or basket or whatever it is that you use, whether they're giving a financial gift or not, as a symbol of all the gifts that they bring to the congregation and to the community, and the offering of ourselves. Form stewards and create a culture of generosity. So y'all are doing that. You're here. Congratulations. Giving is going to go up in your church. But she did find that churches who put a priority on sending their leaders to trainings like this, churches whose leaders participated in events at association, conference, and national level had increased giving because it's a form of generosity. It's a form of you as a church giving to the larger body, to the association, to the conference, to the national setting in our case. Do we talk about stewardship and giving in our new members classes? Is it a part of our curriculums with our children? You know, most of us deal with money the way we learned to deal with money as children. And, you know, for some of us, that was great. My family, we never talked about money. Never talked about money. Some families talked about it all the time. Some families talked about how poor they were all the time. Some families were wondering where the next meal was going to come from. You know, how do we help our children grow in this way? Especially, I don't know about you, I remember sitting on my dad's lap in church when the offering would come by, and he'd give me the envelope or money to put in the offering plate. I just told you, I don't carry a check or money. How do we do that for our kids when I'm giving electronically now? If you don't do electronic giving, recurring giving of some kind, please do. You need to be doing that. I'm a part I'm actually part of 2 congregations, so when I tell these stories, there's 2 different congregations. I'm part of one congregation where we give automatically, electronically every month, and it's an unending pledge. Like there's no end date on it. So at the end of the year last year, it was actually after the end of the year, it was January, maybe even into February. Somehow, maybe I was out traveling, I missed the pledge campaign. We didn't get our pledge in. And so I got a note from one of the church council members saying, hey, thank you for your giving last year. We really hope you pledge this year. And I wrote her back. I said, you've got my money from January. You've got my money from February. You have an unending pledge from me of this amount. I'd rather have everybody on a recurring gift with no end date than give a pledge. Like, now, if you want to ask me to increase it, that's a whole nother story. That's a different question. But I'm giving, you know, it's there and it doesn't have an end date. I see some consternation out there around that. Who does have people who give electronically that way? Okay. And there are a number of resources around how you can do that. Leadership development, we talked about that. Spiritual nurture opportunities. In our book groups, in our Bible studies, are we talking about this? Engaging in social justice concerns. Barbara Fullerton found that people who were involved both by giving and in efforts in their communities saw much higher levels of giving. I guess I didn't give you the key piece to Barbara Fullerton's study. She found that over 6 years in the churches that were doing these 7 things, per capita giving went up an average of 82%. 82% over 6 years. So it's a slow, I mean, still, what's 6 times what is 82? You know, 15, roughly, 10 to 15%, somewhere in there. Dang, we'd take like 3 to 5%, right? Every year, increase in giving. So churches that were involved and engaged in their community. There was one other piece, and I think it's a piece of this. Another big piece she found, and Ann and I were talking about this, and it didn't go so well there, so it'd be fun to explore that. But to offer, and it's in here, it's the one that has italics at the end, most impact in this section. Offer personal finance seminars, classes, and budget counseling. You will not believe the people in your congregation and your community are struggling and have no idea how to manage their money. 40% of Americans are living on 110% of their income, literally. I know plenty of college-educated folks who have no idea how to manage their money. If you can offer this resource to your congregation and to your community, it's a great outreach to help folks. And it, you know, has a byproduct of hopefully people getting their financial house in order and being able to give more to you and other places. A lot of folks use the Financial Peace stuff from Dave Ramsey. It's very popular. Again, it's very theologically different from where most of us are in the United Church of Christ. I forgot to bring along, but I'll send to you to get out. I have a list of ones that are a better fit for us, so I'll send that out to you all. And then this is just for fun. This stuff doesn't fit anywhere else. But it's helpful to know, I think. The general population gives 2% of their income. However, nearly 45% of Americans make no recorded financial gifts. But if you look at giving in the United States across the years, it goes up about 1.5 to 2.5% every year. Yes. Right. Increases 1.5 to 2.5%. 32% of all of that goes to religious organizations, and that's narrowly defined. It used to be more broadly defined, but now it's more narrowly defined as churches and groups that are closely related to churches. But if, like the Salvation Army, other places like that that are religiously motivated are not included in that number. When you include those, it's more like 70%. The mean church gift is $2,000 annually. But the median is $250. right? So what mathematicians can help us with what that means? Right. Exactly. So you have 1 in 5 Christians who make no financial gift. So we can expect that 20% of the people in our congregation aren't going to make a gift. This 2,250 is related to this number. It's also my birthday, by the way, 10/20/70. Please remember. But in general, if you look at the giving in your congregations, and this is a great thing for your stewardship committee or church council to do. It doesn't have to be attached to names, but giving units. 1/3 of your gifts, 1/3 of your revenue will come from 10% of the people in the congregation. 1/3 of your revenue will come from the next 20% of people in your congregation. And the other 1/3 of your revenue will come from the other 70%. Most congregations in the United States of America of all stripes are carried by a very small handful of givers. And that is an argument for why the pastor should know who is giving. Because it makes a difference if those givers who are carrying your congregation are 95 or 45. It makes a difference. That West Hollywood church that I showed you, they had 5 giving units that were retiring and moving away. 5 of their top ones were retiring and moving away. They said, you know what, everyone? We need a campaign around that. They actually developed a 3-year campaign to replace that giving because people were moving away. You can do that if you're aware who's giving what and how to address that. You can also then know who you can go to for specific needs in the congregation. When I have this conversation with some folks, they say, well, pastors know. You just know who's giving what. No, you don't, right? The treasurer's in the room, the people who see the financial books, you find people just because they look a certain way or dress a certain way or drive a certain kind of car, you think maybe that they're a certain kind of giver. That doesn't hold true. If he asked, when I was a pastor, did I know what everybody was giving? And I didn't. But if I were to go back to the parish, yeah, I would want to know. And the other argument that gets raised, of course, frequently around that is that pastors will treat people differently than if you know they're giving. Well, yes, they will treat them differently. They'll go ask them for money when the boiler breaks. But you know what? If I need somebody to run the Christian Ed program, I'm going to treat the person who has gifts and skills in Christian Ed differently too. I'm going to go ask them if they'll be willing to run the Christian Ed program. But I'm not going to treat them differently when it comes to pastoral care. I'm not going to treat them differently when it comes to engaging them on all kinds of levels. And if I am, then that's something I need to be dealing with my spiritual director or my conference minister or associate conference minister or my pastoral relations committee. We as pastors know so much about our parishioners that we have to keep confidential and treat everybody the same regardless of who we know they're sleeping with or whatever drugs we know they're on or everything else. Why wouldn't it be the same with money? I want to get to this last bit on the bottom here, and it said 10%, 90%. Part of it also relates to the income gap shift. So right now, the top 10% of wealth in our country is owned, or 90% of the wealth is owned by 10% of the folks. And 10% of the wealth is owned by 90% of the folks. 30 years ago, it was 1/3 and 2/3. So I was talking with a congregation that did a stewardship campaign 20 years ago, or a capital campaign 20 years ago. And they had like 5, $10,000 to $20,000 givers as their top, and everybody else gave between $3,000 and $5,000 or around that range. And then they had one again recently, and they had 5 givers who gave $50,000 to $100,000, some of whom wrote the check right then, and the rest were basically $1,000 or less. That's kind of difference we're seeing in our culture right now. Makes it even more imperative for us to know and be able to work with that. I'd encourage you all to have those conversations in your church. It's getting around to normalizing talk around money in your church, and that the way we work with money in our churches is contextual. Every church is different, every community is different, and your values, your culture is different. How do we elevate that conversation and make it one that is something that we're engaged in regularly by asking these kind of questions? Why do nonprofit directors get to know what everybody gives, but the nonprofit director who's called a pastor doesn't get to know that? Yeah, no, it's very helpful. Yeah. What else we need to do? So, thank you.